We're all interdependent. We're all connected. And me being born where I was born, having the access to the education, having structure in my household put me in the position that I am today to be able to, make a living off my ideas versus being plugged into some other system.
Well, it's good to have you. I thought the book was very, very interesting, and it was fitting for me because I'm doing this book on justice right now, and one of the chapters I'm doing towards the end is about love. So I was thinking about the themes in the book, like as I was reading it. So here's what I thought we would do. I want to give you some quotes, some of which are from the Stoics, some are not. And then I want you to give me your reaction to them. We'll just go back and forth on them. That sound good?
That sounds great.
All right. So let me give you this one from Marcus Aurelius, which I love. He says, "The things ordained for you, teach yourself to be at one with those and the people who share them with you. Treat them with love, with real love."
I think, the foundation of any good relationship, whether it's friends, romantics, or your work relationships or your relationship with even inanimate things is kind of common priorities, common direction, common purpose, that being a foundation. I'm the child of an arranged marriage. And I think the reason my parents have been together forever is they both walked into a situation with a common purpose. And that may not be considered, traditional for people on this side of the pond, but having a shared journey, a shared aim, a shared orientation, I think can do a lot. And I think what Marcus Aurelius is talking about is first discovering what's important to you and being around people who align with that.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about an arranged marriage would be, I think all relationships require a certain amount of acceptance. Sometimes people ask me, I've been with my wife for almost 15 years. They go, "What's the secret?" And I say, "Not breaking up." Is sort of the secret. All marriage and relationships require resignation. Isn't the right word? I would say it's acquiescence. That's the word the Stoics would use. But a certain amount of simple acceptance of the situation and the person that you're in the relationship with. Because what tears people apart is wanting them to be different, needing them to be different. Needing something as opposed to deciding that you have what you need. An arranged marriage, I think, would just be like a regular relationship with an additional set of challenges.
Yeah, and also some benefits. And again, I've never even been open to an arranged marriage. I've only romantically dated people, but I do see how asking some of the unsexy and unromantic questions right on the first date, your parents looking into doing a background check, I can see how that can be beneficial in the long run because marriages aren't just romantic. They're logistical relationships. That's a partner. And, you want to know more about them than simply if you guys can, enjoy dinner together for an hour.
Yes. And do you accept this thing as sort of binding and indissoluble, or is this one of many of these things that you're going to do, right? And I think that's obviously I'm not sort of arguing against divorce or divorce laws, but the optionality that people have, I do think limits makes it harder to exist in a marriage because you always have the alternative of something else.
Yeah, I think it was Jordan Peterson that said that trapdoor is getting bigger. It's getting easier and easier to get out. And I think, the challenges around ending a marriage, the harder it is, the more you'll reconsider doing it.
Sure.
And I think it impacts by default also the psychology of your satisfaction in it if you know there is an option to get out of it. And I think the bar is going lower and lower for what people think should be a complete deal breaker in ending a bond in a relationship with another person.
Well, I think it's probably not just that it's easier to get out of a marriage, but it's easier literally than ever to find new or different people, right? Like the intimidating overwhelmingness of like going back out on the market is reduced when you can swipe on your phone and find
Yeah.
unlimited other people, right? There's not even the same level of sort of social uh, courage required to sort of get back out there, which probably I think people. It's still gonna always going to be hard, but I think people fantasize or tell themselves that it will be easier, and so maybe they're more open to the idea of changing horses in the middle of the stream, so to speak, than they would be if they knew it was going to be harder, or they thought it was going to be harder.
Yeah, and I think it's also many people jumping into these chasing the high emotions. So when things start to settle and get into even keel,
Yeah,
and they're like, oh, whether they refer to it as a honeymoon period or whether they think the spark, the dreaded spark that they're chasing, it's
sure.
not there. And I think there's a funny Rick and Morty episode about that where the aliens come, create a dating app that can exactly predict the moment your spark will fade, and it gives you a new match. And it has everybody running around, breaking up and getting with new people endlessly while the aliens come and steal all the resources of the planet. And I thought it was such a brilliant thing about kind of this impermanence. And it's like, yeah, I think I have options now. And in the book, I talk about, grandma and grandpa not having Instagram and FOMO and messaging each other constantly all day. And I think the conditions that we're in definitely need us to approach this much more logically and not as emotional as we've done previously.
Wasn't that the interesting thing in relationships is like if you think of a spark as a singular thing, then yes, it probably does go out at some point and it would make sense to get a new relationship. But if actually you're more of the mind that human beings are constantly in a state of regeneration, the world is constantly in a state of regeneration, that you're becoming a new person, they're becoming a new person. The idea is that spark changes or goes out and is relit and goes out and is relit, or you start different fires, however you want to look at the metaphor. But I think the idea that there's this sort of singular thing that's burning all the time, that it never goes out, that there's never darkness, that there's never coldness, right, is probably asking far too much of another person or of the institution as a whole. And in fact, if you think about it more, like I think about it with my wife, like the person that I was when we met at 19 years old is so different than who I am now, just as like the person that I was 5 years ago is radically different and 10 years ago. And so the idea has to be that you're both sort of regenerating and reforming the relationship on a continual basis. Whether it's a romantic or an arranged relationship, whatever, the work is in that, not in sort of preserving or maintaining this thing and never letting it change or go out.
Yeah, and I think also, that great book Attached also brings up the idea that initial spark in itself could be a warning sign to run the other way, because what's happening is it's, you're meeting somebody who matches the flavor of a previous trauma, and we always lean towards what's familiar over what's healthy. So oftentimes, and Attached also says, we're not denying the idea of a soulmate. We're just saying you most likely passed up on them because you thought they were boring, because we're so often chasing these strong emotional charges, which may or may not serve our purpose. And again, we're influenced by media so much. The most popular couples we've seen, the Rosses and Rachels of the world, at the end of the day, those aren't healthy couples. Those are people with a dog and, a cat and mouse chasing game, somebody with avoidant and somebody with anxious attachment. And very often, kind of regulating ourselves and chasing peace, which is not the roller coaster. It's the even keel side of this, isn't something that's really fed to us, by the Disney film, at least the older Disney films that we grew up with, or the rom-coms or the romantic novels or the escapes that we do. And then we base what we're looking for based on that. And as you said, it really is, a relationship really is. It's 1,000 marriages and 1,000 funerals. You're marrying somebody new almost every day, and you're mourning the loss of somebody new, old every day, because there's this constant change. And there's a beauty in that if you sign up for that. And I think, I love Stoic principles because there is such a focus on the impermanence of people and the impermanence of yourself. And that by default makes you more grounded in reality, but also allows you to live in a much more gratitude for what you have in front of you while you have it.
Yeah, the Stoics like to quote Heraclitus, which is this idea that we never step in the same river twice,
Yeah.
right? We're different, the river is different. And I think if you think of relationships that way, and not just romantic relationships, but I try to think about this with my kids. Like my kids are always getting older, always changing. And so, like, I thought we bonded about X. Hey, you love dinosaurs, right? And it's like, no, I don't love dinosaurs anymore. I love this thing. And you're like, but I was just figuring out dinosaurs because I thought you liked dinosaurs. Like, I don't give a shit about any of these things, right?
Yeah.
There is this kind of someone told me that it's this sort of almost a constant mourning, which I love that you just talked about funerals. It's this idea that the person that they were exists only in this moment, and then it's gone forever, and you can't try to keep them a certain way. You can't if you're and the other part is if all you're feeling is sadness that they're not a cute 3-year-old anymore, or that this isn't your 11-year-old girl anymore, or your 19-year-old son anymore. What the cost of that is that you are not getting to enjoy your 12-year-old or your 20-year-old or your 40-year-old, or the son that you thought was X, it is now gay, or you thought was interested in X and is now quit that job and taken their life in a totally different direction. Like if you try to keep them as something, not only is that not fair and tyrannical, but it's coming at the expense of you being able to enjoy who they are in this moment now.
Exactly. As well, I have a chapter in the book that says, they can only love you for yesterday. And it's also understanding that we put ourselves in those prisons. I realized for me, one of the biggest prisons I kept myself in came from compliments. When people would say, oh, nothing bothers Humble. He's always emotionally cool and calm. And then that made me feel this, imaginary pressure to maintain that reputation, even at my own expense. And then, I'm serving now as a prisoner, and then moving forward, I become the guard for somebody else, telling them who they need to be and sending them subtle cues. To gain my acceptance, they have to be X, Y, Z. And that's so often you start to see that kind of unspoken pressure to live up to expectations that people may or may not even have about you because they haven't communicated or updated you on how they feel.
Well, let's go back to this idea of the spark, which you mentioned briefly, because that strikes me as another Stoic quote about love that I think about. Marcus Aurelius, in the beginning of meditations, he says the point of life, that he learns this from one of his mentors. He says the point of life is to be free of passion. But full of love.
Full of love, yeah.
What does that mean to you?
I think it's understanding, and for me, the journey was once I shed many of the external quote unquote prisons that I had, realizing that I'm still a slave to my habits, my passions, my indulgences, the voices inside my head, and I think what he's really saying is to really not we have these, and I refer to it as bootleg love, but we have these misconceptions of what love can actually be. And oftentimes those are these highly charged emotional things that, people just, the unrequited love, for example, the irrational things we do, the end of the world heartbreak, and all of this.
The big gestures.
And then we start the gestures, the massive big gestures is like, hey, I'm not a good husband on a day-to-day basis, but let me take you to Paris once a year and
sure.
That'll make up for everything. And we have all of this, but this doesn't create pathways, of love on a regular basis. The analogy I use is love is the breeze. The work that we have to do is to open the sail. There's no finding or discovering or earning or winning love. The love is there. It's realizing love. And oftentimes we create the blockages. And I think our stronger emotions and our passions do get in the way of love in many capacities because we chase these quick fixes, these very delicious but not very nutritious facsimiles of love: attention, status, power, control, validation, admiration. And all of these things can start to feel like love. But, if they actually were love, we wouldn't be chasing them as often as we are. And we're chasing pleasure not to feel good, but to medicate our lack of peace. And I think what Marcus Aurelius is saying, to be free of passion yet full of love, is allow the love to, because for me, love is what remains when everything else isn't there. Love is the screen that this movie is playing on. So to be free of passions by default will make us full of love. When we scrape away all these extra emotions that really are enslaving us in many ways, what's left is love. And that's an abundant, eternal source. And then when we focus on ourselves being that source of love, we can spend more time sharing that love instead of chasing it, trying to find it from other people.
Yeah, and to me, it's also the idea that, sort of passions are about pleasure and wanting, and it's this sort of big force you don't control. And love is closer to the idea we were talking about earlier, which is a sort of an unconditional acceptance. It's a thing you're radiating outwardly towards everyone and everything. It's a sort of a place of fullness where I feel like so often passion is rooted in a kind of craving, and they're just fundamentally different ways of going through life.
And I think it's interesting that these ideas, especially from the Stoics, came so early in human civilization when we're still pushing so far in the other direction. So it's like, as you said, it's this acceptance of imperfection, allowing people to be who they are. The subtitle of this book is Going Easy on Yourself, going easy on yourself, going easy on other people. Everybody we love, we could list every single imperfection they have. None of that disqualifies them from the love we feel from them. But for some reason, we feel like we have to be perfect all the time to qualify or earn love. And I think that is a result of, being in a culture of buy shit, be happy. And in order for them to get us to buy shit, we have to feel like we ain't shit until we buy this shit. And I think and it's really interesting that these ideas came even before it was a heavy commercialized, capitalistic, consumeristic society, that they kind of was nipping it at the bud right from the beginning. And I do think, there's Epictetus that talks about, love being for the wise, or the power of love coming from the wise. And it's really, the purpose of the book and the purpose of just even looking at love through a lens of logic. It's not your heart versus your brain. It's having that wisdom through, allowing your emotions to calm down for a moment and building a level of self-awareness to have a deeper understanding of yourself, what matters to you, who other people are. And as we continue that journey, we start to realize that a lot of these ideas of what we think is required for love are really roadblocks, or slashing our tires on this journey.
All right, so I'm going to give you one from Seneca. He's quoting a philosopher named Hakato, or he's paraphrasing it, but he says, "I can teach you a love potion made without any drugs or herbs or special spell. If you would be loved, love."
Wow. Okay, that lines up with the title of the book. I think oftentimes looking at love as we look at it as this thing. And the truth is, love is a service. It's an action.
Yeah, we think it's a thing that we get as opposed to a thing that we give.
It's a thing that we get, yeah, and it's expressed through service. It's expressed through action. It's something that we do, and so and I love what you talked about with your kids in terms of my kids are into dinosaurs, so now I'm starting my journey about learning about dinosaurs. When so often people are like, oh, I love you, let me show you my world. Often many parents try to live through their kids and have their kids do what they like. Or you start dating someone, you want them to hear your favorite music, watch your favorite movies, read your favorite philosophies, or whatever it may be. And love really is, no, let me dive into their stuff with that same level of enthusiasm and learn about it. And I think love through service and understanding that love, the verb, has the power to reveal more love is extremely important. And, that's the big idea in the book. To be loved is to be loved. And that's why we put the D in parentheses.
All right. I want to give you one of my favorite quotes from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Let me find it here. I have it on my note cards, but I wrote this down. Okay. This to me is one of the saddest, but the truest quotes that I've ever heard in my life. He says, "All life is just a progression towards and then a recession from one phrase. I love you."
A progression towards and then a recession from I love you. Oh, wow.
To me, what he's talking about, and Dr. Sue Johnson talks about this too. Like we reach out and then people pull away, or we get close to someone and then we pull away. We want this thing so badly, and then we get it, and we're afraid of it, or it challenges us, or it demands things of us, and then we run the other way from it. We think we want love, but love is actually this, incredibly challenging, difficult, unwieldy thing.
Yeah.
And we find out that when we have it or we come close to it, actually we don't want it.
I mean, it could also go to the idea that it's not what we think it is, especially when we chase it from other people externally. And I can see that. F. Scott Fitzgerald, that's Great Gatsby, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, his stuff is always, you're not leaving his stuff with a big smile on your face. Yeah. I mean, I think there is, as I said, with the misconception of like what love is, and I think for me, like love is fuel, not glue. Love is what fuels your efforts and your energy. It's not what keeps things together. And I can see, I think that second part of it, receding from it, I think is an interesting kind of idea where I'm hoping that building pathways with somebody strengthens over time with effort. But I wonder if that relates back to the kind of the romantic, unrequited love that so many people often kind of worship in their lives.
Yeah, I think he's not saying it as a good thing. I think he's sort of lamenting it as a tragic, as the tragic fate of human beings, right? It's like we achieve a success and then we dismantle that success, or we're so often our own enemy when it comes to getting the thing that we think we want.
Oh, I completely agree with that. We're definitely getting in the way, and it's and it's less about getting, and it's more about shedding. Shed what's getting in the way more so than acquiring more things, and that's kind of the philosophy of unlearning that I've kind of devoted my life to.
All right, I'll give you another quote from Marcus, which I don't know if he's directly talking about love here, but I think we could say that he is. He says, "What doesn't transmit light creates its own darkness."
That's beautiful. I think it speaks on intentionality of what we're putting out there, and it's there's a duality to darkness and light, and this idea that if you are not transmitting light, you are creating your own darkness. When oftentimes we view darkness as an absence of light, so it's almost like if you're not putting it out, then you're creating darkness. You're making it. So it's almost like either you make things better or you make things worse. It's not simply not making things better will keep things the way they are. So, it's either, you're either growing or you're shrinking. And I think in terms of, if we want to interpret in terms of light, either you're putting love out there or you're closing yourself off to love and kind of sentencing yourself to a prison of darkness.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's about that too. It's this idea that you have to actually open yourself up to the stuff, and that so often we close ourselves off to the very thing that we say that we want. Which actually, maybe this is where the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote is trying to go. Right? Is we say we want things, we want the light, but then we turn away from it, or we don't accept it, we don't transmit it. And thus are responsible for not having the very thing that we say that we want.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like getting one flat tire and slashing the other three. Yeah. And it's that kind of idea. And now you got me thinking about The Great Gatsby. Just again, I think that's my biggest exposure to his work. Yeah. But it's it's this idea of the fortresses we create to protect ourselves end up being our prisons, and to get out of that. And to get out of that prison, requires a level of vulnerability, requires a level of putting yourself out there at the risk of being hurt, because you close yourself off for the purpose of not being hurt. And to go from a bad place to a better place requires us to go through a worse place. So I think making yourself vulnerable, participating in this game of bringing things to the light. It's not a flawless game. You're not promised endless, wonderful days. You're only entitled to the work, and the outcome is going to be the outcome.
So, connecting love to something deeper than, again, I think this idea of romantic love. Cornell West has a famous line. He says, "Justice is what love looks like in public."
Yeah, I mean, I remember, reading about the importance of the justice system also alleviates the individual from vengeance,
Mm.
the burden and responsibility of vengeance. If we have a system in place to address crimes and ensure an environment of justice, that alleviates people from taking things into their own hands because they may or may not understand the true cost of that. So I think there's a portion of love there. I think also the clarity and communication of what a society stands for and what matters is such an important element to love and creating harmony. It is really interesting when you walk through a major metropolitan city full of millions and millions of people and you're like, this is relatively calm. Like this, people are agreeing to stand in line and wait their turn. Like 6, 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, they were bashing each other's heads in with big rocks, and now here we are. And oftentimes, we've come a long way from Babylon, and I think there's a really beautiful side of this, and I think our sense of justice is being tapped into because we want things to work, we want to cooperate. That's such a important element of our survival, and to be doing it on the scale that we've done it, I think is just really interesting. So I can see how justice then becomes love because it serves the people.
Yeah, I think I once heard love described as willing the good of the other. And if you think about what society is built around, or what, a just world is supposed to be predicated on, it's this idea that you want other people to have equal opportunities. You want them not to know fear or to know want. You want them to be able to become what they're meant to become. You want them to have happiness. You want them to be treated fairly. You want them to have and have access to things that perhaps you don't need because it's not your, you're in a different place in your life or whatever. I think if we think about the social contract, we think about justice, it should be predicated on this idea that you give a shit about other people, even people that you don't know or are not like you at all.
Yeah, and I think, the beauty of that is, giving shit about other people is acknowledging that you're part of something greater than yourself. I think it's the reason we love being in a crowded sports arena. And now we're all just fans for a team, screaming, hooting, hollering, and there's no individual. Now we're part of an ocean. And I think it's the same thing here where, the beauty of love too is that it melts kind of our ego boundaries. The beauty of love is that it melts our ego boundaries between us and other people. In an intense romantic relationship, it does that really well. But from a societal part, whether we say, oh, I'm a New Yorker, and now we all have this common bond, or you say, I'm a Canadian, or, whatever we may be, like these common identities melt the individual. And what they do instead is they allow us to kind of become the everything and nothing. And I think that creation of kind of order and justice, really acknowledges that. And I like the way you put it. Like, even if I don't want it, somebody else should be able to have it. And I think it's that level of acknowledgement of other people. Because I think so often we're tortured because we think we live in a universe of one. And, that loneliness and that isolation in itself creates a level of kind of disharmony, which has us chasing for everything externally. So I do love that idea of justice and how it kind of brings us all together.
Yeah, there's this idea in meditations where Mark Aurelius talks about how he says what's bad for the hive is bad for the bee. But of course, it's really easy, obviously, for us just to think about ourselves. But if you have this sense that everyone has value, everyone deserves, these things, that all of our fates are tied up in each other, that we're all, not just of equal value, but that if something happens to this person, even if it's 1,000 miles away, that affects me too. Even if it doesn't literally affect me, it affects me too. To have someone be persecuted or mistreated or to starve to death, that says something about me and it affects me. And so I think if you come from this place that, yeah, other people matter, that you care about other people, you you wish. Are you familiar with John Rawls' theory of the veil? He has this idea of like, imagine you're designing a society, but and you're picking the way things are going to be, right? But you don't know where you yourself are going to fall in the system. So like you take America and you're like, okay, I want a capitalist system, a lot of income inequality, not a particularly good social safety net, you know, different minorities are at different levels of vulnerability to, being caught up in the criminal justice system, blah, blah, blah. You explain the system, you're like, well, it works pretty well for me, a white guy born in, this time in this city, whatever. But if I'm designing that system and I don't know where, when you roll the dice, where I'm going to end up, I'm going to have a radically different understanding of how okay I am with that system, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm good with the system because where I am is a pretty good spot in that system. But if I was a different color or born 100 years ago, or I was disabled in some way, right? All of a sudden that system sucks pretty hard, right? And so I think to me, when he's saying that love is what justice looks like in public, it's thinking like, well, how would I care about? How would I think about this if it affected somebody that I loved, or if it affected me, who I love the most? All of a sudden, your opinion's going to be different.
Yeah, there's an anthology episode of Atlanta in their third season where somebody wins a court case for reparations, and that starts the snowball where everybody whose lineage is traced back to a slave owner is getting sued by people whose lineage is traced back to being slaves. And they're, so now the world is flipping upside down. Everybody's going on 23andMe or, to make sure that, they're immigrants in one capacity or another. But there is, at one point, there's a gentleman that's talking about it while everyone's complaining about how unfair it is. He goes, listen, we are freeing our children from this ghost. They're going to start at zero, but they're starting at zero free of these chains. And it's almost like he is able to look at it through a perspective beyond himself as well, which is, okay, this just flipped my life over. All my assets are gone. Everything that I quote unquote thought I built is gone. They make a strong argument for taking it away from me, but also, although my life as I know it is over, this is really going to free future generations to kind of level the playing field from a point of justice. And I thought that was really beautiful. And it just, the irony of all this too, is I'm wearing a shirt that just says, all we got is each other.
Yes.
And it's like, this realizing throughout my journey that our relationships are, even when I measure my career, it's like, I've been in this for 10 years and only made new friends. I haven't lost any because of my work.
That's a good measure of success.
I really think it is. And it was a joke that I had made. I reached out to my friends coming back to Toronto for a couple of days trying to plan a dinner, and they couldn't do it. And I was like, listen, I'm supposed to be the guy too cool to hang out with you guys. It's not the other way around. You guys are getting too busy for me. And I was like, and they would always make jokes about, oh yeah, things are going so well for you. You're going to leave your friends and make new ones. I was like, I'm working on it. I'm trying to get rid of you guys, but it's been 10, 15 years and you guys are still around. So I guess I'm stuck with you. But you start to realize that that's the value and beauty of this life, is those relationships. It's, even understanding that they're not permanent.
Yeah. It's weird. As you grow and change, and you experience a kind of success, it is easy to just sort of stop thinking about certain people, or to find yourself in conflict with certain people. But I love the definition of success that I'm only adding. I'm not jettisoning anyone or anything. That you still have room in your heart for them. Although, you posted something recently that I liked. You were talking about how just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you have to keep them in your life.
Yeah, completely. I think forgiveness is a burden that we're holding. We should forgive to let go of that burden. It's not to say I accept what you did to me. So if you hurt me, it's less about my relationship with Ryan and more so about, do I want to carry around this giant backpack of resentment? I want to let that go, but I'm moving forward with my eyes open, and we don't have to have a relationship anymore. Again, I'm fortunate that I haven't had any falling outs with my childhood friends, and there's the beauty in that. So I haven't had to, but I've definitely had relationships where, lines were crossed, and you do forgive somebody. It's not to hold a resentment anymore, but yeah, stay over there. I have love for you from afar, and that's the remainder of our story. It's going to stay there. But for me, I view forgiveness heavily as I think resentment is one of the darkest places we can be. And often resentment comes because we choose being likable over trying to access love. And, I have a chapter in the book that says love is showing your teeth. Establish boundaries, communicate boundaries, stand up for yourself. Because if you don't, you're drinking the poison of resentment, and now you're putting yourself in a dark place. And there's not a lot of love to be realized in that space. So forgive for your sake. You're not validating their behavior by forgiving them. You don't even have to tell them you forgive them. You just have to forgive them to rid you of that heavy weight and burden.
Well, you tell the story in the book about the falling out that you had with your father. You end up sort of running away from home. Walk me through that story, because I think it touches on the stuff you're talking about right there.
Yeah, it was one of those moments where you realize your parents aren't perfect. And, I was a broke student, had an $800 car. Something was wrong with it. I had it, parked on the driveway. I was still living at home. And, I had some, shady friends that were going to help me get it fixed. And I was still waiting and figuring out how to do it. And out of frustration, my father went and got one of my father was a cab driver, so he knew all the mechanics. So he went and got one of his mechanic friends to fix it. And the bill ended up being like $2,000 or something, like worth more than the entire car. And it really upset me that he went and did this and then told me I had to go pay. He's waiting for you to go there and pay him now. And then out of the argument, we're both the same person. So long story short, I got really pissed off, and he's like, look, if you don't like it, get out. And then I literally filled up garbage bags full of clothes and ran away. And it wasn't running away like a teenage kid I ran away, and I was already plotting in my head where to stay, where to work, where I could stay for a while. I was going to leave the city. It was already ruminating in my head. And, there wasn't conversations, and I ended up coming home when it was apparent that my sisters let me know that it was taking a massive toll on my mom. And, came home, and me and my father, till this day, never discussed it. And it just slowly, over time, our relationship kind of warmed back up. And then it wasn't until this pandemic when I was having, lunch with my sister and her teenage daughter. My sister retold the story, and she made it really funny the way she told it. And then she let me know that my father had called her that same night and said, here's a blank check, whatever he needs, just you pay for it. And the interesting thing was, my sister had called me and said to me, look, whatever you need, if you don't want to go home, whatever you need, let me know. I'll pay for it. And at that time I had thought, oh my God, she has my back, not realizing that my father had given her money to take care of me because he knew I wasn't coming back. And I think that was just another example of just like a deeper love, but also, some of the challenges that you go through with some of the people you care about the most.
But don't you think it's there's something about that? I've written about it for Daily Dad a bunch of times, which is this daily email I do. There is this it's a sweetness, but it's a sadness in I think that generation where their heart is clearly in the right place. They do this very nice thing, which is the writing the blank check, and they're willing to tell, or they manage to bring themselves to tell everyone but the person that it matters the most to, right? Like it's the other version of the story is like, you're at the funeral for your grandfather, your father, your mother, or whomever, and they go, you have no idea how proud they were of you. And they give you the stack of all the papers that they collected of every, one of your achievements or whatever. And you're like, this doesn't seem like it would have been that hard to communicate. Right. And it's sweet, but it's also terribly, terribly sad at the same time. Like maybe you guys had never like there's a version of that story where not only you never find out from your sister that your father had made this gesture, but you might have never reconciled with your father at all, right? Because of the inability to admit error or apologize or reconcile.
You're absolutely right. And, there's another story in the book called Nuzzer, which kind of explains that, with my mom bluntly telling me that she will never tell me she's proud of me because she thinks that will instantly put a curse on me. Because the only, and it's their belief, and it really is. It's their belief system, which is it's always been a thing that we kind of had to. I think as adults, me and my sisters laugh at it, but you're absolutely right. It's deeply troubling to a level, and I think we just had to make peace with it. I know recently my parents went to like Calgary, Alberta, and walked into the mall and went to the bookstore, and my mom casually brought up my name, saying, "Do you have his stuff?" And and I'm Canadian, and the Canadian bookstores love me. And he was singing my praises, and it filled my mom with so much pride. But I only know about this because my sister was secretly taking pictures of the interaction,
Yes.
And I guess we made peace with the idea that they'll complain to us to our faces and they'll praise us to our siblings. And I won't know, and she's never brought that story up to me, and to me, it should be more like, okay, so, you're making all this money, but you don't have a wife and kids. And, I saw a pre-construction condo outside a sign. You should go invest in that, and it's starting to realize that, again, that their tools are limited, and they're doing their best. And also, as I said, seeing them as grandparents, they're completely different people as well. And it is hilarious. I'm like, who are you? Where were you when I needed you as a kid? And as my father says, he goes, your kids are your kids are the principal investment, and your grandkids are the interest, and you can only enjoy the interest. And
that's so terribly sad. But I certainly relate to the idea of it. It certainly jives with my experience, but it seems so terribly sad. It's a prison.
Yeah.
That is so self-imposed, like so easy to break out of. And I don't mean easy to minimize that it's hard but it is not for instance, it's no longer like, say it was, I don't know, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's not some societally enforced prison, it's not a prison dictated by, abject poverty or worried about being killed by a lion or a tiger, like it's a prison that is purely there because of one's, as you said, lack of emotional tools. But it's not as if those tools are a life sentence, like those tools can be picked up.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think some of the grace I was always giving them is being like, wow, like my father was 13 the first time he saw a light bulb. Like, wow. He literally grew up in a hut made out of, mud and stone, and, sure. Lost sibling, like the way he speaks about the siblings in his life that have passed away, like, oh yeah, we went playing and then he fell in the river and he drowned. And like, that's his casual story. And you're just like, that's trauma, bro. Like, we gotta talk about that and unpack it in some capacity. And it's like, okay, he's gone from that to, sharing viral content to me on his phone that's maybe 7 months old. I remember when he shared the news that, what was it? Some bogus news that Samsung paid Apple a lawsuit in pennies, and it was like something that you had seen years ago. Like, he's just discovering how to use his phone to waste time. And I guess I hold some grace for that in the context of, like, he came from, like, there's not much of a jump. There's never going to be much of a jump of lifestyle for me compared to what I could become a billionaire, and sure. I'm still going to have the same phone, drive a pretty similar car, live in the same cities. Like, this guy literally came from a world of no electricity. They believed in ghosts. They believe in curses. They believe in all of these things. And it's like, to go from that and then to just to cross an ocean and live in a world of snow and racism and taxes and all this other stuff. It's just like a whole different world to them. But you're absolutely right. That doesn't, there was a speaker, I forgot what her name was, but she said, there's no there's no generation gap. There's just people open to new ideas and people closed to new ideas. And, you do see that on various levels for various people. And I think, I'm sure individuals' algorithms aren't helping them now with their echo chambers. But I guess I can view it from that capacity. But you're absolutely right. I guess for me, it's clutching on to what I can. My mom saying, I'm not going to say I'm proud of you because it's going to create a curse. I was like, oh, that's her love language because that's as good as it's going to get
is
for me.
telling you she's proud of you. She's saying she's not doing a thing that she is. Do you know what I mean?
She's trying to protect me by not saying nice things to me. And I think there's an interesting thing there.
Well, we talked earlier about willing the good of the other. I mean, there's a certain amount of empathy and grace in the attitude that you're picking up there, which is you're trying to understand why they are the way that they are and filtering the actions that could be hurtful or not fully what you need or any of those things, trying to interpret them through the lens of why they are the way that they are, as opposed to just feeling the pinprick or the wound or the deprivation that is also there. But thinking about the intention or the worldview of the person is a form of love also, right? You're giving them extra space that maybe you wouldn't give a total stranger who is just rude to you on the street. Although ideally we would all get to a place where we could do that for them also.
Yeah, and I think it starts with us. I think that's what I'm realizing. It's like, if I can only begin giving them grace when I can give myself grace. And I know for sure I grew up in a house that was heavily self-regulated. It encouraged self-regulation. It encouraged a lot of sucking it up. And then as an adult, I became heavily in this world of suck it up. And, that really had a negative impact on my ability to show empathy, or attunement or, any type of kind of, grace to anybody for being anything less than perfect. And then you start to realize it's like, okay, well, their context was different. They were literally on food on the table. This, we're not here to be emotionally nutritious. We don't even know what that is. I remember helping another friend who had drama with their parents, and I brought up the word therapist, and they looked at me as if I said, something bananas. Like I asked them to eat mushrooms or something. And they're like, therapist, why would we tell anybody else our business? And that's a big cultural thing where these small tribe cultures are so concerned with what other people think. And I understand that being a primitive survival method, but they would literally not call 911 if their house was on fire, if that meant other people would know,
Yeah.
It's so bananas. And it's something that, you want to have grace for because you understand that context. But at the same time, you're like, look, I don't want you to be stuck in your ways. And at the end of the day, this didn't serve me. But my journey of kind of being my own, the chapter in the book, be your own nurturing parent. My journey of being my own nurturing parent is allowing me to kind of see them through a different lens, but also realize that I can't just keep pointing my finger at them and being like, okay, you can't be empathetic towards people because your parents subtly told you to suck it up. It's like, no, like you're an adult now. What you recognize the issue. What are you going to do about it now? What work can I do about it now? Because at the end of the day, they still put me in a position to be where I am now. And even I had to shed that, I had to shed this idea that I'm somehow a self-made person. And I had to recognize that we're all interdependent. We're all connected. And me being born where I was born, having the access to the education, having structure in my household put me in the position that I am today to be able to, make a living off my ideas, versus being plugged into some other system.
Yeah, and then I think the interesting thing about your book is how to love and be loved. It's so tricky, talking about your childhood or anyone's childhood. It's so hard to give what you didn't get, or what you didn't get enough of, or that you didn't get right. And so when we're talking about sort of being open to new ideas or tools, it's understanding that, almost certainly the way that you were raised, I don't mean you, I mean all people, almost certainly the way we were raised or what we saw is not fully everything that it should be. And it takes work then to get to a place of being able to love and be loved, especially if, the example that you had or the experiences that you had didn't teach you, you know, all the things that you needed to know.
Yeah, and I think a big lesson for me was I was an elementary school teacher before all of this, and realizing that I had a lot of control over that environment and how these kids viewed themselves. And when I started hearing them parroting some of the really irresponsible things I was saying and doing, one example was, I think I said, you know, if a kid's hurt, either they're being a baby or either they're being a baby for attention or they're actually hurt. Let's give them space. So my goal for saying it was, if a kid gets hurt, don't crowd them, give them space. But adding in the potential that they're faking it, was so toxic on my part. And I was like 21 at this time, just getting a teaching job in the same neighborhood I grew up in. But then you start to hear the kids parrot it, and the kids try to determine if a kid is faking it or if they're really hurt. And you realize that I'm pushing this cycle. And it took me seeing it outside of myself to realize that, okay, wait a minute, what's the root of this for me? Where did this come from? And I'm sure you as a father, all the things that have not been resolved or revisited or even realized, through your upbringing, start to come to bubble up to the surface as they impact how you raise your young ones.
Yeah, it's I think that's the work of one's life, hopefully, is to get a little bit further than where you started as far as these ideas go, right? So if you think of your parents' journey, right, it leaves off with you, then your journey, then where do you leave off? The people that read your book. I think that's the idea, and it goes to Seneca's quote that the way to be loved is to love, is to put this stuff out in the world and to do that work.
Yeah, completely. And I think, there is a level of, I guess privilege, because, it's interesting, when you look at the emotion wheel, it's almost, I think it's like 80% negative emotions. And I think there's happy.
What's the emotion wheel? Sorry.
It's a wheel of emotions. So it'll tell you kind of all like the basic emotions. I had this emotion wheel. So it's kind of help people express themselves, and it's kind of like a small circle with more. It's like a bunch of pizzas, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so the main emotions are happy, surprised, bad, fearful, angry, disgusted, and sad. So, and then from there you can break down happy to playful, content, interested, proud, accepted, powerful, peaceful, etc. But the interesting thing is, happy and surprise can go either way, are the only really two positive emotions. Sad, disgusted, angry, fearful, and bad are all emotions on the other side of the spectrum. And you realize that the reason we have more, I guess, a leaning towards what we consider negative emotions is because of survival. You don't learn much when you're happy, and it's these negative emotions kind of create opportunities or create motivation and energy for survival, and realize that we're predisposed to that. Like, our paranoia, served us as a survival method. And I think very often we don't recognize that as our world has changed, our internal software isn't catching up. Our biology is still primed for who we were 10,000 years ago. And, in this capacity, leaning towards these negatives and, as you said, like, the whole philosophy that you've devoted your life to is about being free of desire, pain, grief, and fear. And, that's getting out of survival while being in it. And, most often by voluntarily putting yourself in those situations to kind of regulate your resilience. And I think from a capacity of love, I speak a lot about choosing self-respect over self-esteem. And it's like, it comes from doing this stuff yourself first and accessing your own internal source versus chasing outside validation.
Well, man, it was awesome. I thought the book was really interesting, and I'm so glad we got to meet.
Yeah, pleasure. And also just, again, want to thank you. Just in my journey, when I left my job as a teacher, I left it thinking I had a big record deal, and I quit my job started living off credit cards, thinking this money was going to come at any moment. And I found out the producer that had kind of put this all in front of me was lying, and then he took off, and then I was kind of in the dumps. And the game changer was the 50th law.
Oh, really?
It was, I kid you not, like the 50th law, you know, and I know you had a hand in, you know, I know you researched for it, you interned for it, and I'm sure you helped in other capacities, but I think that was my first exposure to kind of Stoic principles, and the overall idea of observe things and find the opportunity versus judging it as good and bad. And you know, it really changed the course of my life at that point, because then I stopped looking at life as it's something that was happening to me, and I started asking myself, well, where's the opportunity? You know, where are the breadcrumbs? And it really changed my frame of life. And you know, I was making music before all of this, and that's what got me into writing, realizing that I had a lack of resources to make music at that point, focus on what was in my control, which was black and white text. I wrote every single day on Facebook, like a daily blog. And that's what built my readership up. But I mean, it was such a game changer. And I didn't even buy the book. What happened was somebody, the dude that ripped me off, he took off in such a haste because he got caught. He left his laptop at my place, and he had the book. He had he had a bootlegged audio MP3 version of the book. And so I remember I had nothing to do, so I would go for super long 3-hour walks and listen to it on my headphones. And just, you know, and it changed. It was literally the first step to changing everything for how I started to handle my life. And you know, I'm proud to say here I am. And it was, you know, it wasn't my first exposure to Stoicism, you know, at all. But I remember buying 48 Laws of Power and being like, ooh, this book sounds evil. I don't want to read it. I don't want to be evil. And then being like, oh no, this book is going to open your eyes to what people are capable of and what is possible. And having a deeper understanding that, you know, the world isn't simply just good and bad. There's a lot in between, and understanding that and having a deeper understanding of yourself and your expectations of life make a huge difference. So I just want to thank you for that. This is a full circle moment for me.
Well, I'm sure Robert Greene will love to hear that story, because I agree. It's an incredible book, and I was changed so much just by, you know, being able to see it come together. But man, that's so perfect. And that is one reason, you know, obviously you never like seeing your stuff ripped off, or, you know, people stealing your stuff on social media, or every once in a while, you'll find bootleg copies of your books. And I do try to remind myself, you never know who this book is going to end up in somebody's hands for. And if all you're thinking about is like, did I get my piece of that transaction? You could be cutting yourself off from so many wonderful, beautiful, you know, interactions or connections. And I think that's part of why we have to keep that even keel, not get too upset or too elated about any of this stuff, because you have no idea what any of it will mean or where it will go.
1,000%. And I mean, listen, I'll pay you back any way I can. So
I don't have a piece of that book, so you'll have to take this up with Robert. But I'm sure he would love to hear that story. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys.